Thank you, Arthur. Thank you for that introduction. And first of all, I'm privileged to be here this morning. I do have to make some clarifications. I met my wife as I was on the mission field, but it was after I finished AIM and went back, okay? For the AIMers, that way they know that it was after AIM that I got married, okay? Just throwing that in. It has been a blessing to be here this morning, to be at this workshop. I never thought I'd be in this room in this position. I've always been in your position as a student here, and what an opportunity to come and speak. I live in Southwest Louisiana. You probably know more about my area, not because of Sulphur, Louisiana, but because of Lake Charles. Last year, Lake Charles took on 2 direct hits of hurricanes, and I live in that area. My wife and I and my 2 kids moved stateside in 2003. 2005 was Hurricane Rita that hit New Orleans area, and then 3 weeks later we had Rita that hit us. And since then, it seems like every year, living in the Gulf Coast, that we've had some sort of a storm, flood, something going on. And we've been recipients of all sorts of blessings I'll share about in just a second. I am the associate director for an organization called the Churches of Christ Disaster Relief Effort out of Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm here to explain what that's about. My objective is to let folks know how we can bless your congregations and help you when there's tragedy to be the gateway to blessing to other folks. And I'll share a lot of things that's going on there. So thank you for being here today. Tomorrow's class, there's a second class on it. It's basically going to be about the same. I've had a number of folks says, hey, we want to be in your class, but we also want to be in others. So they're giving me 2 times to do this. If I mess up today, then you can come back tomorrow and get the other version. So thank you for what's going on. I gotta say this, disasters will always happen, whether it be a flood, tornadoes that hit and rip apart neighborhoods and places around, winds that knock down trees. Lubbock knows a little bit about winds, don't we? Living here, I remember those times. Fires that's been going on, if you're aware. Colorado had their big fire, 1,045 homes that were destroyed recently. Kentucky, that whole swath of houses and homes that got destroyed. They said over 200 miles of tornadoes and all sorts of damage that many of you are aware of. And hurricanes that hit every year, multiple hurricanes. I was watching the news the other day, and it was the Weather Channel going through 2021, the ABCDs of all the storms, and they got down to L and they stopped. They said A, B, A is this, B, and when they got to L, they stopped because that was Laura. Laura hit us in August 27th of 2020, and we've got about 45% of our homes that were affected. Of all those that were affected, 45% are still with blue roofs. In other words, they have tarps on them that have not been repaired. So you have that happening throughout the country when storms hit. Question is, when they hit, because they will come, you will have a disaster, what will you do? You know, we thought about that a long time ago when I first came stateside and was working. There'd be a tornado someplace or a hurricane hit. And our question was, what are we going to do as a congregation? And normally, like most congregations, we take up a special contribution. We were small. We'd have maybe 2,500, 3,000, which was good for our congregation. And then we're like, okay, where do we send that? Who do we send that to? I've learned through the years that when a storm hits someplace, there's a lot of difficulty of getting them help. The reason why, you're wanting to send in the check. Does the postal system run? Do they have their mailbox set up? What happens with that? Can they get their money in? Just recently, in the Kentucky storms, the tornadoes that hit, I had a church in Houston area that called and said, we want to help the churches over in Kentucky, but they don't want to receive anything from us. And I said, well, what's going on? They said, well, we're wanting to wire money into their accounts. Pretty large sum for each of these congregations. And those congregations thought it was a scam. No, we're not going to give you our bank account because you're going to scam us. So he called us and we ended up getting funds to them. So even when you've got money to give to help those folks, It's difficult at times to get money to them. Even if you did get it to them, you got to think, their city has been hit. Their stores have been probably shut down, maybe destroyed. Where are they going to buy anything? And how much are they going to buy actually on $2,500, $3,000? Well, that question came about some 30 years ago. A guy by the name of Joe Dudney. Joe Dudney was one that lived in Nashville, Tennessee, and he says there's got to be a way that we can help churches throughout the country. His idea, he wanted to get it through all the United States. Well, you know about Tennessee and Nashville specifically, it's like the hub of the churches of Christ. Tons of churches in the area, and they said, what can we do if we pooled our monies? Is there something we can do to bless churches to be able to bless their communities? And out of that was born what you and I have heard of as Church of Christ Disaster Relief Effort. An idea of coming together as churches to be able to pool their funds and talk to different groups, furniture groups and food groups and appliance folks to pull all that together, let these organizations know what we're trying to do, and then out of that maybe get some discounts so that our dollar would go that much more further. Well, the next thing was, where were we going to put all that stuff? Well, a building was purchased, 410 Allied Drive in Nashville, Tennessee. We have a warehouse now that houses all that material. Now, not your washers, dryers, refrigerators, stoves, bedrooms, living rooms. All that comes from the manufacturers, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But they wanted a place in a way that when a storm hit, because they hit, whether it be a tornado or a flood or whatever, that they would be able to send out from that location, have on hand, ready to go supplies in semis that could be dropped to whatever little congregation in that local area that has been affected, to let them be a blessing to their community. If you're a church of 40, 50 and your community gets hit, what kind of resources do you have? You really don't. But now you've got a resource, and we send that into that congregation, and that congregation now can bless their communities. All the supplies have been purchased. It's all been purchased from donations from churches of Christ. It's there to be a resource for that local church and to let them to be a light. Let them to make a difference. Put them on the map. So I'm going to share with you the first thing we needed, because our organization tries to put as much as possible into the food and the purchases. We try to have very few on this side. We have a lot of volunteers. On Tuesdays, when we need folks to make up food boxes or cleaning buckets or other things, we put out the call to the Nashville area. And we'll get hundreds of folks to show up. Tennessee is known as, at least the college is known as, the Tennessee Volunteers, right? I understand why they're called the Volunteers. Once I went there, folks turned out in groves, church members. Retired folks would come, and there's that lady that sits on her stool, and she's got the green beans. You know, you got in your congregation, you got your specific seats where everybody sits. Well, she's got her green beans, and nobody gets in her spot, and she puts her green beans in that box as it passes. And they go through there, and on a Tuesday morning, those senior saints will pack 1,500 food boxes. Food box will feed a family of 4 for a week, feed a single person for a month. They weigh about 65 pounds. They have everything in it that is non-perishable, all the way from paper plates to the can openers to all kind of canned goods and snack goods, things to get folks through disastrous times. Time giving, I'll share a few of those stories, but I want to kind of share how that runs. So they'll go in and they start packing things. We've got bulk, and we've got a conveyor belt. They'll put that boxes on, and they'll start adding stuff to that. It gets to the end here, and at the very end, you'll see the guy on the left has that's a packing box. The last thing to go in that food box is a New Testament Bible. On the inside of that Bible, somebody has taken the time and the effort to write a handwritten note, usually something to the effect, "We're sorry that you're having to go through this difficult time. Know that this box has been packed with love, and we're praying for you and your family and your community. Signed, Sister so-and-so or Brother so-and-so. And that's the last thing that's put in that box before it's taped and put on the pallets. Over the years, and this is as of November of 2021, we have sent out 530,000 plus food boxes. Now, a buddy of mine one of my coworkers did some math on that, and here's what he come up with. Those 530,000 plus food boxes have rendered over 10.4 million meals from the start of the time that Churches of Christ Disaster Relief has started. That's impressive. It blew my mind. I know I have been a recipient for many years of trucks sending down food boxes that fed my family and my community and our church and lots of folks. What a blessing Nashville had been for us. The other thing that we got to thinking about, if 530,000 plus boxes have been sent out, that also means that 530,000 plus Bibles, over 500,000 Bibles have been sent out to be placed in households of homes and families that's been hit hard during difficult times. That to me was impressive. I got to tell a story. It was back in 1998 up in a place called Watertown, New Jersey or New York. There had an ice storm that come through and devastated everything, knocked out the power, knocked out all the utilities and everything. There was this 67-year-old lady, lost her husband. She was kind of entrapped in her home and had run out of food a couple of days. And she talked about how she never knew how to pray. She didn't know what to do in those kind of moments. Didn't have any electricity, didn't have any water, had run out of food. And she says, I didn't know what to do. I'd never gone to church. She didn't have a religious background. She said, I just started talking. If there's a God, can you help me? Can you do something? She had about 2 to 3 hours, a knock came to her door. 2 or 3 members from the Watertown Church of Christ showed up with one of those food boxes. She broke down in tears and said, I don't know how you got to me. Well, you and I do. You and I know how they got to her. And gave her that food box. In that food box, she opened up and saw the food, but she found that little book. She didn't know what it was. You and I know it's a New Testament. She found that little book. And a couple of days later, she called down to the Watertown Church of Christ and said this, I've been reading that little book, and I need someone to talk to about it. It's interesting. The preacher got to spending time with her, got in a study. Eventually, she was converted. And when she died several years later, she was a faithful Christian as a result of some folks taking a food box that had a New Testament in it that talked about a guy that you and I know as Jesus. And as a result, she died and went to heaven to be with the Lord because of efforts of folks in a little small town of Watertown that was willing to reach out and touch their community. I thought, man, how powerful. It dawned on me what kind of thing I've had in my ministry as a local minister. I served 17 years in the pulpit in Maplewood Church of Christ in Sulphur, Louisiana. And all those years, just about every year I was there, we handed out food boxes with a Bible in it. Where it went, how it turned out, a lot of them, I don't know, but I know that those households had Bibles in them because we got to place them in it because of this organization. I'm grateful for that opportunity. Once those boxes are packed, we stage those in Nashville. We have an old Lowe's warehouse, you can kind of imagine, and we have truckloads of material ready to go, already packed. You call and say, hey, we've had a tornado, we've had a flood, we've had a bad storm here, we need some supplies. It takes our guys about an hour to load this onto the trailers. It's already packed, it's already there. They come in, put it on with the forklift, put it on the trailers, lock the doors, and send it your way. We claim between 24 to 48 hours maximum we can get that there. Many times our guys, there's 5 of us that work throughout the United States. I'm over Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. That would include most folks in this region. But we've got folks in the up in the northwest that cover all that area. We've got up in the central area, in the northeast, and then in the southeast. We've 5 of us work all over the United States. I guess you'd say we're like storm chasers. Tornadoes, hurricanes, we're watching, looking. We'll call your emergency planning of your county and say, hey, how many homes have been affected? Then we'll call you as a local church and say, hey, do you know that you've had, according to your local officials, you've had 95 homes that's been affected through this storm? Would you be willing to receive a truckload of material to get out to your community? And then we'll send that over to you. That's kind of how that works. So we've got that ready. We've got our trucks on standby. So what happens? You call. We send that truck. It comes to your local place. It's unloaded. And honestly, if it's a bad storm, most of our trucks, you've got about $75,000 to $80,000 of merchandise, about 26 pallets of supplies. Most of our trucks, not only, well, they go ahead and empty them. They go ahead and drop all the stuff and they leave. But before that day is over, most of our truck supplies are gone. That's a semi-truck, 53-foot semi-truck of supplies have been distributed out to the folks in the community. Sometimes they call back for a second truck. We got so many folks, we need more supplies. Now, the good thing that we do that a lot of organizations don't, and when I say organization, this is the church work. This is sponsored by, funded by the churches of Christ throughout the country. The funding comes in from there. So it's our organization. It's something that we all participate in. But on the backside of that, when all your other entities have gone, when Red Cross is pulled out and Salvation Army and FEMA and all those entities, on the back end of that stands the churches of Christ to come back in and we help furnish their homes. We give them a room of furniture. We give them beds and bedding to sleep their loved ones in. We're the last ones to pull out of those communities. We make sure that those homes get furnished. I've got some paperwork up here of a couple families that 3 weeks ago picked up household furnishings in Beaumont, Texas for Hurricane Harvey. You remember that? That's 4 years ago. Who has been on the scene helping those folks? Well, the churches of Christ have. And they got to get back in their home right before Christmas because we had the supplies to bless them with. I feel blessed to be a part of that. And I know they're grateful for what goes on. We come into there, you can put up a sign, a banner to let folks know. Folks, while folks are pulling around getting their stuff loaded into cars, your whole congregation gets involved. You don't have to pack the stuff. It's already ready when it comes from Nashville. You just hand it off, put it in the cars. On the backside, as folks pull through, you're getting information. You're finding out who they are and what they need. And I always tell my elders, I said, elders, don't be out there loading cars with supplies. You stand here. You get this intake of information. You get to know those folks. If you need to pray for them right there, pray for them. You take down their information. If you need to earmark that you want to go back and visit that family, you do that because that's what we're here about. And you get all their information that allows you to get back in their homes later on with situations, opportunities. I want to share about them. This was a tree that fell on our fellowship hall during Laura in 2020. This was the Methodist church behind us, and if you'll notice, one whole wall and end of it, they've only got 2 sides to that building. That's how bad the storm was from Laura that hit in 2020 of that area. We got to working during that time, and I just brought to kind of show you, there's about 900 applications that we took in. During Hurricane Laura, we sat up, didn't have electricity. We sat underneath our carport. We had ladies that would sit there and fill out information, like I showed you a moment ago on those sheets, and get all their information and send them over to the warehouse to get their supplies. 800 to 900 applications were filled out, and we have their information, their names, their telephone numbers, their kids, maybe even their work, those kind of things. I've also got a mess load of those that we've already finished. Not only did they get the cleaning and supplies and food boxes and all that, They also got furniture and appliances to get back in their homes. All that has been a blessing. I want to share with you, before I get to question, let me share a few stories. 2016, if you're familiar, there was lots of flooding going on. Up in Indiana and places like that, there were major, Grand Rapids and places like that had major flooding. All that water has to come south. I live on the Gulf, so we're about as further south as you can get. There's a river called Sabine River. It splits Texas and Louisiana. But the reservoir above it is Toledo Bend Reservoir. Huge reservoir. Splits both states. That reservoir was over capacity. And they had to let the waters out because it was beginning to flood the homes there. So they let that water out, and as that water came down, it flooded both sides of the Sabine River all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. The Interstate 10 was shut down. Shut down. Interstate 10, can you imagine, was shut down because it was flooded for several days. Man, 750 plus homes were affected, destroyed. We got to go back in on the river, the border. We call it the swamp rats because they live on the river and they're strange folks, most of them. They've lived hard lives. And a lot of times they'll meet you at the door. If you come knocking, they'll meet you at the door with a shotgun. I know because I had it happen. We'd been handing out material and folks had been coming. We've been helping them. And I went to see a couple of months after we had finished distribution. I wanted to touch base with some of those folks. And I went to this one couple's house. I remember she was pregnant during the time. Her baby was born just right after the hurricane. So I had them in mind. I wanted to go check on them. And I go and knock on the door, and lo and behold, there's a screen door. He opens up the wooden door, and there's a barrel sticking out of his door. What do you want? Oh, I'm here. And about the time I started to say who I was and why I was there, he looked over my shoulder, and luckily I hadn't taken the magnet off that was on the side of my truck that said Churches of Christ Disaster Relief Effort. He saw that, that old frown turned into a smile. He says, honey, the church is here to see us. So he let his shotgun down and gave me a time to catch my breath, and okay, he's not going to kill me. And he did something I've never had happen. Even friends don't do that. He invited me to come back into his back bedroom. I said, sir, I don't do that. He said, no, I want you to see something. And I go back there, and he shows me the bedroom suit that he had got months later and how it was set up. He was so thrilled, and they were so proud. They wanted me to see how their house had turned out. And so humble. Them old river rats, just so humble. And I did something I could almost bet you had never happened in that house. And what went on, I'm sure never did. I grabbed that big old boy by the hand, and I grabbed his wife, and I said, kids, huddle up, grab hands. He's looking at me, and right there in the middle of his living room, I prayed for him. I can almost imagine they've never had a prayer in that home. I know they probably had never led one, but I did that day. I did that God would bless them and open their hearts and then continue to help them get along. I prayed for the new baby that had been born into that family, that hopefully he wouldn't have to go through hard times, but if he did, that he'd know that the church was there to help. Didn't get through that prayer before that old boy jerked his hand away, not because he didn't want to hold hands, but to reach up and wipe out a tear. Never had that happen to him before, but we had an opportunity because tragedy had hit. And a gateway had been opened to bless folks, and we were able to touch some tough folks and get into their lives. March 2000, or this past year, now in Birmingham, Alabama, small group of Christians, a church plant. Charles Parker, the minister, was there. Just small group of folks. A tornado came through, ripped through, and messed up their community. He calls and says, Brian, we've just been hit. We need help. I said, well, that's not my area. I'll get you in help, but I got to let you know something. You're fixing to get put on the map. He said, what are you talking about? I said, brother, if you get one of these trucks in there and you do it the way that we talk about, you'll get put on the map in your community by everybody around you. I said, just wait and see. You'll call me back in a few weeks. And he did, and he confirmed it. And I said, just wait. A truck was sent in there. I said, you call your mayor and let him know what you're doing. Not for any other reason. You just want to stay in contact and let everybody know. Call your police because they're going to need to know you're going to have a lot of traffic. They're going to need to help direct traffic. So he did all those things, handed all that out. A few days he called me and says, Brian, you're right. Man, he said, I've never seen anything like this. The mayor's been on board. The mayor sent some of his folks from the Parks and Recreation come over and helped us distribute. He paid their work days so that they could come and help work with us. The neat thing about that, a couple months later, well, not the neat thing, another tornado hit about 30 miles away. That mayor got in contact with Charles Parker and said, Charles, we want to send some of our crew to go help you 30 miles away in a city that's not our own in distribution to those folks. Can we help? Wow. I mean, these folks aren't Christian. These folks aren't involved in anything, but they had been so touched as a result. I talked to Charles right before, a couple weeks ago. I was going to a speaking. I said, Charles, tell me once again, because I don't want to lie to folks in Lubbock and other places. What's been the result of all that? A couple things. He said, first of all, there's been 19 souls that's been baptized and added to the Lord's church as a result of that outreach. 19 folks, a church plant. They're wondering, God, we're small. How are we going to do this? And all of a sudden, a tornado comes through. A tragedy happens. A church has compassion, as Preston said so eloquently this morning. They reached out and 19 souls came to Christ. I talked to him 2 weeks ago. I said, he said that one of the things that the mayor is doing, the mayor found out that they're trying to get their building back up and going, and they're going to put a fellowship hall on the back, but it's going to be more of a sort of like a warehouse so that when storms happen, the mayor says, you know what, let me say this. The mayor didn't tell him. His contractor told him. The mayor got a hold of the contractor of the church that was doing the work and says, we want to pay a portion, a pretty good portion, of having their fellowship hall built. Where does that happen in our world today? A city helping pay for a church's expenses. Well, he saw the light. He's been touched. He's opened up his Parks and Recreation office and building. On Thursdays, they have a Bible study before they start work. Man, I'm like, wow, this is cool stuff. I love it as a missionary, as a minister. I'm like, this is so neat. Doors opened up. We also had another storm last year called Ida. Hurricane Ida hit Louisiana and devastated city after city, swamping all the way up, on up past Baton Rouge, on up further north, did all sorts of destruction. We sent in 20 truckloads of materials. One of the first places we set up in was a place called Laplace, Louisiana. In Laplace, we went into that local church, small church, and said, hey, we want to use your building. So we're good. We're not meeting right now. We don't have electricity. Everything's kind of messed up. Come on in. We started work out of there distributing to the areas. There were small churches down south we couldn't get trucks into, but we could get trailers and pickups. And so we started moving that material out of what we called ground zero. It was our ground zero of Ida, and everything flowed out of there. And we got supplies to all these churches in small communities. Several of those communities, one in particular, didn't have a church in the vicinity. I'm not just talking Church of Christ. I'm talking about any sort of a church. There was one old Catholic church building that had been there, hadn't been used in over 2 years. They saw that, the members there, the different congregations that were helping, said, there it is. There's our next church plant. There's where we want to establish a church of the Lord's body right there. And so they went into that school system. That the school was able to distribute out in that area, and they're working this year, of planting a church there. They found some Hispanics in Laplace that had to be there because of zoning and all that. A big group of folks. There's a church plant taking place in there. The good thing, 13 souls have been added to the Lord's body in that work out of Laplace, Louisiana last year as a result of disaster relief efforts going on. We got a few minutes. I want to offer some time for some questions and answers. I know we've been going sort of fast, got some more stories, but I want to turn that back over and see if there's anyone here that might have any questions about us and what goes on and anything. So as I do when I'm preaching, I'll step down off the podium and I'll become part of the audience. That way you can, yes ma'am.
It seems like people are more open to in hearing about Christ when there's some type of disaster.
Yeah.
You thought that that's true.
Yeah.
And then what happened to the guy who had the pistol at the door? Did
Yeah.
you keep in touch?
Constantly. Let me answer the second one first. The Johnson family, I'm still in contact with them regularly. Matter of fact, his aunt called me the other day. It's neat how to watch that once they find out that the church is willing to help, but sincerely, not just handouts, but really to help folks that are, they send folks your way because they know they count on you to bless others' lives. That's still an ongoing thing. We've had some talks and studies, but the door's still open. Very good friends. Matter of fact, I've got him coming over in about 3 weeks to work on a four-wheeler and a lawnmower. Yeah, I'd like to get them fixed, but you and I know it's not to get them fixed. That just gives me more time to spend with that family. So you look for things that way. The first one, yes, the door's open. I don't know of another opportunity in our day and time. You can't door knock and it do anything hardly. But when storms hit, that's a lasting impression. There are folks here. There's a number of folks right there. I could go, where's Josephine Bennett? I could go to her house right now and say, hey, how are you doing? I've got a doorway. I'm the one that gave you a washer and dryer. You remember back when in the beginning we gave you food box? Oh, yeah. Doing that opens the door, who knows for how long? As long until you get their furniture and appliances, which is in Beaumont for Harvey, it's been 4 years. In our area, it's already a year and a half, and we're just now getting ready to start distribution of appliances because most of those homes haven't been ready to get anything in. So a year and a half we've had to spend time getting into lives. I can go knock on that door and say, I'm from the Church of Christ. How you doing? How are y'all coming on recovery? Using that as a doorway. And is there anything I can pray for you? All kinds of ways of opening doors. I think the thing is as Princeton talked about this morning, having compassion with the folks that are suffering around. There's folks suffering all over. And it doesn't have to be some major disaster. There are things going on in lives. Get involved when disasters hit because that opens doors. We call it gateways to blessing. And I love being able to do that as a minister. You're like, how can I touch the folks out there? They see me as a minister there. How can I get in their lives, to get in their houses, to hopefully get Jesus someday in their home, in their hearts, through teaching them about what it needs to do to become a son or daughter of God. So, questions? Other questions? Okay. First of all, we call the local congregation. We want to find out where they're at and everything good there. First, can you help us? Or are you willing to take that truck? When a disaster hits, normally it comes to the church, and sometimes the Churches of Christ is one of the smaller church affiliations in that city. And there's a big community outreach where everybody takes stuff. We don't want that. Our criteria is we want it sent to your church, and we want you to distribute because, first of all, we want the light to be shed on your local congregation. They don't need to know about Nashville. They need to know about your congregation. So we send it into you to be able to distribute. That gets your folks involved and touching, and we want folks coming there that they know here's the folks that gave that out. Okay? On the people?
When the church comes,
Yes, sir.
do you have certain criteria? Is there a criteria that needs to be met before you send the system?
Well, first, for both the churches and in the site. Number one, we want to make sure that's 75, 80 homes or more. If it's smaller than that, your community can normally take care of it. So it's got to be large enough. The other thing we ask, where's your church? What kind of, where do you stand as far as your doctrinal teaching? Are you usually are you an a cappella church? And do you have women leading in services? Are two of our primary questions. That's the things they've kind of asked from that we set up and find out, are you in good standing in the brotherhood type thing? And so that's kind of what we look at. And then we send that stuff in. Now on the receiving side, it's usually for folks, when it comes to food boxes, cleaning supplies, that's anybody. It don't matter their religion, their background, who they are, where they come from. If they have a need, we want to serve them. Now, as we go further down the line and we start getting into the furniture and appliances of distributing that to folks, we want to know, are they homeowners? Is it their home? Did they have insurance? If they had insurance, it's probably covered. So we usually don't help those. And so we try to find out that kind of criteria as far as giving those big supplies. And that takes a while to get in. So that's how we sort of do our screening, both from the churches, is it where it stands, and then how big is the disaster, and then the recipients of those kind of supplies. Any other questions? Let me share some things. What can you do? Well, a couple of things. Come up, take a group to Nashville. You want to make a neat trip. There's all kinds of things to see in Nashville. Nashville, the music city, capital of the world, all sorts of events and activities. But plan a time, get your congregation, call Nashville and set up a time and say, hey, on one morning we'd like to come by for a couple of hours and pack boxes. And they'll set up that food line for you. They'll plan that, and you can come in there and take your church and get distribution. You can see what that's about as far as distribution. They'll take you through the warehouse. They'll show you the whole 9 yards. It's part of the church. It's the Churches of Christ disaster relief effort. Funds from all over the country. Our little church started back then. We get $2,500, $3,000. Can't do a lot. What do? We send ours to Nashville because we know they can take that dollar and stretch it to about $3. A lot of information out there. We claim 85% of every dollar that comes in is spent back on supplies. That's not the truth. That's a low bottom. Last year it was somewhere in the 90 some odd percentile. 87, I think it was last year or the year before. It's been a long time since we've got that low. We're only 85%. Usually it's more than that. Goes toward putting that in. We only have a few. I think it's 15 of us that work, and some of those part-time. We're built on volunteers. Truck drivers, volunteers. The folks that pack boxes, volunteers. So most of the work that's done is done through volunteer work. Few places, maybe Lubbock might be the only other place in the country that would have a conglomeration of church members that would be able to come and help pack boxes. But even then, Nashville has a multitude. I mean, they have thousands of members to call on, and they come out in groves and help pack boxes to be able to get stuff out. That's why it works so well there, and I'm grateful for it, for the blessings it's been. So plan that. Come out and speak. The other one is, I put that. Let me go back because I said something. Let us come speak to your congregation. I would love to come and prepare your congregation so that when a disaster hits, you'll be ready. You'll know what to do and how that works. And when it does, we'll say, hey, we're going to send a truck your way, and we're ready. You've done told us, you showed us. Let us come speak to you. The other thing, come pack with us. We've had youth groups come out in the summer. Send a youth group out there. Let them find out what it's about and look at all that. The other thing, you might want to partner with us financially. I'm not here to promote fundraising. God He continues to bless. If you're serving and turning that out, He pours that way, and He lays it on people's hearts and churches' hearts. They send, so I'm not here, but that's one way. I will mention a couple things. Smile.amazon.com. Guys, and anybody else, you buy on Amazon.com, don't you, regularly? Start doing it through smileamazon.com. Same thing, don't change anything. But what it does, you can select Churches of Christ Disaster Relief as your charity organization. They give, it's a minimal, it's a 0.0 something %. It's not a lot, but up to now we've received $10,000. I do a lot of buying on Amazon. My wife does a whole lot of buying on Amazon. And Amazon puts that to some charitable organization. If you want to, you can go in and choose Churches of Christ Disaster Relief. I looked at it the other day. I have generated, since the beginning of this year, $15. And I'm like, I didn't spend that much. $15 I've generated toward that in charitable organizations in Nashville through my buying on Amazon. I'm going to buy anyway. Why not let some of that on the backside come out of Amazon's pocket and go into helping that? That's one little thing. The other thing, if you're a federal employee, School teacher. My wife's a school teacher. They're mandatory having to donate. Usually it's United Way in our area. Now the Churches of Christ Disaster Relief is on that national charity board. So you can select them if you're a federal employee to have your donations, contributions sent there. Okay? So that's something to think about. Last thing I want to say, just when you got a storm and it gets overwhelming for your community and your church, call us. We want to be that resource, that supply house for you to send in resources so that you can touch your community and change lives. Come by and see me. I'm downstairs out there. I've got a booth. Come by if you want to get more information. Come by and let me know, because if a storm hits, I need to know who to call during that time. Put your name and your congregation down. Okay? Thank you for your time today. If there's anything else, we'll talk up, because I know there's another teacher coming in. Thank you for being in the class today. God bless you. Enjoy the workshop.